Good morning. We are live this morning. We are talking big emotions. Today I'm in conversation with Renae Reinardy. Did I say it right?
You did, yes.
Yay. And we are talking big emotions and helping our kids deal with those and learning how to regulate their emotional tolerance.
Mhm.
Renae will be answering questions live on air. If you are joining us live, please feel free to put any questions or comments in the comment section. I'll be looking for those, and then she will address them live on air. If you are watching a replay of this, thank you for doing so, but Renae won't be able to answer your questions on the replay. However, often other people who are watching replays dialogue with one another, so feel free to put your questions and comments in there, and just know that somebody else may be answering and dialoguing with you and not Renae. Good morning, Renae. Thank you.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
We appreciate you taking the time. Why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. Well, my name's Dr. Renae Reinardy, and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Currently, I have a practice in Fargo, North Dakota. Prior to that, I practiced in Minnesota in the Twin Cities area, Minneapolis area of Minneapolis, St. Paul area. And before that, I was in Washington, D.C. for a while. So over the course of, I guess it's been about 22 years now, I've bounced around a little bit. So, and I'm currently coming to you from California. So I'm all over the place. But I'm really happy to be here. I specialize mostly in anxiety disorders. I see probably about 80% of my practice is working with people with obsessive compulsive disorder. I treat phobias, a condition called trichotillomania, which is compulsive hair pulling, skin picking, hoarding disorder, and Tourette syndrome are what I mostly focus on. I also have a company called Courage Critters because the majority of people oftentimes do not get the opportunity to come into therapy. So I try to make a lot of these skills more accessible for people. So I have a plush animal system and an online program, couragecritters.com. And yeah, I do a lot of mental health awareness, especially early intervention. And that's why I'm so excited to be on today, because the sooner that we catch mental health and emotional health issues, the more we can prevent for people, preventing academic struggles, preventing experimenting with drugs, preventing incarceration. There's a lot of things if we catch mental health issues, which oftentimes begin in childhood and adolescence, it's a great time for intervention.
Wonderful. Thank you. When we were talking leading up to this conversation, we circled in on big emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
We decided that we would big emotions like anxiety, stress, sadness, failure, and that you would help us being parents and caretakers of tweens and teens, learn how to navigate that territory with them, because these are part of life, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think what I see a lot of times working with my kids and adolescents is they have an unrealistic expectation of what their emotional life should look like. And like a lot of expectations about what they think they should look like physically, or how much money they should have, or what their first job should look like as coming out of college and becoming CEO, are all things that maybe require a little bit of tweaking, right? So, and emotions are no exception to that. I work with a lot of young people that they haven't had a lot of practice dealing with uncomfortable emotions. They avoid them. The other thing that happens oftentimes with screens is people are distracted from their emotions as well. They haven't experienced being bored. They haven't experienced some of these things. They're used to that immediate gratification. And things don't always work that way. So it's really important to let kids know that, hey, you know what? Part of our whole human experience is a variety of different emotions. And there's a difference, of course, between what we experience as typical emotions and what we may experience as not so typical, or emotions that, given kind of your standard way of coping, don't tend to decrease. The intensity remains really the same. And that's really where professional intervention is needed. But it is important as parents, and I'm a mom too, as well as a psychologist. Now I say as a psychologist mom, now I just know what I'm doing wrong. Whereas if I worked with psychologists, sometimes we don't know. We try to help our kids be comfortable. We try to have them avoid difficult experiences, but the truth is they're going to have them anyway. And they need practice and they need tools in order to cope more effectively with those emotions and also get an opportunity to gain emotional tolerance. So, I think we'll see if there's questions along the line about that, but I can maybe speak a little bit to emotional tolerance in general. So this is something that I think is so important and something that is oftentimes overlooked. But when I work with kids and they come into my office, they're so stressed out usually. The expectations that they put on themselves or maybe that others have put on them is really, really high oftentimes. And they're really struggling to meet those expectations. And part of that expectation is that they should be happy all the time. And so it is really important for kids to be able to take a step back and know that they're not going to be happy all the time. That's okay. That's, again, part of our normal human experience to be sad, to be frustrated, to feel like we're missing out sometimes, to feel embarrassed, to experience failure. These are all normal life human experiences, but kids are hit so hard with them oftentimes. Well, we all are. Nobody likes to be uncomfortable, but there's a difference between being uncomfortable and things being dangerous. So I'll give you an example. Specializing in anxiety and phobias and things along those lines, I oftentimes work with people that they're uncomfortable, right? So if I'm working with somebody with a phobia, maybe they're afraid of thunderstorms, for instance, and that can be scary and uncomfortable, but probably not dangerous. It probably doesn't require the avoidance response and the level of emotional arousal that people have. But what we have a tendency to do as humans is to avoid anything uncomfortable. We try to push it away. We don't want to experience it. It feels bad. But we can't do that all the time with things. So when we've kind of gotten accustomed to pushing things away and pushing things away, so it's really important for people to understand, to have clear expectations about what their emotional life may look like. And this, includes the teenagers. This is the best time to learn these skills because teenagers are being introduced to so many new experiences. And so it's good for them to have these experiences. This is how they learn it, and things are going to pass. And that's another really important thing. Get the experience, have a chance to build the tolerance. So when I'm working with somebody with the storm phobia, for instance, we're not avoiding it. We're not turning on the TV real loud and turning on all the lights so they can't see the lightning going off or things like that. But we will listen to the thunder. We'll watch the lightning from a safe location. And really experience it, to be like, okay, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to watch this. We do, it's called exposure therapy. We do it gradually. So I might first show people pictures or videos and then work up to the real, or what's called in vivo experience. But it's really important for people to not run away from those things, but to give their nervous system a chance to experience it, especially when it's a false alarm and something that maybe doesn't require that strong emotional response. And so I have people sit with the emotion and not run away from the experience itself, and also not run away from their internal experience as well as the external experience. So exposure therapy is both giving people practice with the external experience and then giving them practice with the internal experience too. So when I'm sitting with someone who's afraid of thunderstorms, for instance, I'll ask them, tell me about what's going on with your body right now. So where do you feel that anxiety? Do you feel it in your chest? Do you feel it in your throat? Do you have like a tightening sensation? Do you notice your shoulders rising up? What do you notice within your body? Are you noticing any other thoughts that go along with that, right? Like, oh, it's a thunderstorm right now, but maybe it's going to become a tornado. I want to be aware, and I want them to be aware of, what is my full experience right now? How do I not run away from this, but learn how to sit with it?
Hello. Kamira's
Hi.
having a little bit of technical difficulties, so she sent me, my name is Jessica. I have all of the questions that
okay, great.
You can keep going if you want. You clearly have
I saw all of a sudden the screen and I wasn't quite sure. So, but but I'm happy if this, continues to work. I'm happy to.
It's working perfectly fine. It's
Okay.
I think you've already been answering some of the questions already just by talking, but I have.
Okay.
I have
Yeah, and I'm happy. I know I paused for a second there, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can just keep going.
Yeah, no, you were doing.
I'm
You're
glad
doing
that,
fine. By the way, again, I can see all of the questions in the chat. If anybody wants to pop in and ask a question, we have I can bring them up on the screen. But so let's start with, please define big emotions for us. I think you might have already kind of touched on that. I think that she already asked.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a little tough sometimes. There's not a line that's like, okay, this is typical, and this is like, whoa, big, right? So, and everyone's gonna vary a little bit on how they experience their emotions and just their temperament too. So, so an example that I use oftentimes when I'm working with kids is I talk about our nervous system kind of like cars, right? So, and some people have very reliable, easy to drive emotional systems, right? They're the Hondas. So nothing wrong with the Honda. Hondas are great. They're inexpensive to fix. They, you put the inexpensive gasoline in them. It's fine. And then we have the Ferraris, right? Ferraris are fast. They're big. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Ferraris are pretty cool. But it's giving people a different understanding. It doesn't mean that anything is bad or broken or wrong if they have those big emotions. But just like someone who goes out and buys a Ferrari, for instance, they might require some extra driving lessons, right? So they're not so easy to operate. And that's an important thing when people have big emotions in a big emotional life, maybe just their temperament, or they have something big going on in their life and a bunch of little stressors that have built up, or a major stressor that just knocked the wind out of them. Then they're going through one of those Ferrari moments, and they can benefit from those driving lessons with their emotions. And then I have some kids, and they might be like on the autism spectrum or something like that. They're helicopters, right? That's great. So, but helicopters too require some training and some understanding because they drive a little bit differently. Not bad, just different. And it's just learning how to operate your unique nervous system. Everyone's going to be a little bit different. And as a therapist and having done this work for a long time, I know that it's not a one size fits all, do this treatment approach and it's going to work for everybody. Usually it's this integrative and eclectic model that is most helpful for people in learning how to deal with big emotions, things that they find that they just can't shake on their own. Or as a parent, when you try things that maybe worked for your other children or worked for you, and your child is still like cannot even deal with it, right? It just means we have to work on that. We have to show them some of those tools and strategies, just like we would with anything else. Most of the time we can't magically just know how to do it. We have to learn it. So, and I think it's so important for kids to learn emotional coping skills.
We have an audience question. Speaking of stressors, the internet is my stressor this morning. Jessica has taken her beautiful face off, but she's going to stay in case it happens again. I now have multiple screens. I'm surrounded by multiple screens. But we have a question here. Nope, wrong one. Dina. Hi, Christina. Thank you for joining us today. She says, how do you advise parents who have kids that seem to solely focus on the negative or failure and not to look at a positive in a way of a solution, for example, sports?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that it's looking at how do they conceptualize failure, right? So how do they see that? And I think, the one thing is, accept failure is going to happen. It will happen. You're not going to be great every single day. You're not always going to get picked for a varsity sport. You're not always, even professional athletes have bad days, a lot of them. We just don't tend to see that as much. We see the big shiny after product. And so it's really important for kids to understand failure is all right. So it's how we learn. It's how do we deal with that failure? That's the thing that we really want to look at, because that is such an important life skill. And being able to, and usually we're skewed, especially if we have a little genetic predisposition toward depression or toward anxiety, our brain is in that caveman state, right? So we're always like, how do I survive this? Where does the bear live in the cave, right? So we're always going to have that hypervigilance for bad things. And bad things will get labeled as dangerous, but they're not dangerous. So it's being able to understand this will happen. And as a parent and as a psychologist, something that I'll do with my young people, I'll share some failures that I've had in my life. I've failed so many times, right? And it's fine. Even though I was a good student throughout school, there were a few classes or a few exams or papers that didn't go as expected, right? So that's all right. The journey continues. And I think that's such an important thing for young people. They tend to overgeneralize. They take a single negative event and they see it as a never-ending pattern. So because I didn't do well in this game, I'm terrible at basketball and I should never play, right? Because this person at school doesn't like me, I'm never going to have friends and no one likes me. So because I didn't get invited to this party, I'm never going to get invited. Because I didn't get into that college, I'm not going to get into any colleges. And so we want to watch language like that, the always, never, not being able to accept compliments is something too that a lot of people struggle with, especially in the Midwest where I live. And so it's something that it's really important to take a look at those thoughts. There are, on my website, if people go to lakesidecenter.org, I have under forms, I have a list of not so helpful thoughts. Our brain is not always a helpful advisor, right? So, and they're called cognitive distortions. And there's a variety of them. So the overgeneralization, which I was just talking about, things being a never-ending pattern, looking at catastrophic thinking. Well, if I don't get into college, I'm never going to get the type of job that I want, and I won't have the type of life that I want, and I'm going to live in a van down by the river, right? So it's something that it's really important to notice all these different thoughts. I can promise you that you didn't invent it, right? So, or that your child didn't invent it. Our human mind tends to work in patterns. So in those patterns, we have to throw in a monkey wrench every once in a while. And this exercise I'm talking about, being able to first identify, what is my script? What is my soap opera? What am I telling myself? I watched Days of Our Lives probably 30 some years ago. If I turned it on today, probably 3 days I'd be totally caught up, right? So because the script doesn't change that much. And our own script doesn't always change that much either unless we edit it, right? So it's really important to take a look at, what am I thinking? Does that fall under one of those cognitive distortions? And there's mind reading, there's fortune telling, there's the catastrophic thoughts, there's personalization. So if somebody's having a bad day, we may think, oh, they're mad at me. I must have did something wrong. My teacher's grouchy. I probably did something to offend them. And so we want to identify those types of thoughts because often they're not accurate. There's studies, it's a little tough to know, but in the cognitive sciences, they estimate that we have anywhere between about 6,000 and like 80,000 thoughts a day. So depending on the study that you look at, but no matter what study, it's thousands, right? Easily that we have throughout the day. A lot of those thoughts, especially for prone more to anxiety, they're going to be influenced by some of those emotional states. And so we first identify, what am I telling myself? Then I start to challenge it. And I'm like, wait a second. Do I know for a fact that thought is true? Do I know for a fact I'm never going to have friends the rest of my life, right? So do I know for a fact that, I'm a big loser and nobody likes me because I didn't play well in the ball game last night, right? So we want to look at, is it true? Sometimes thoughts are true. So if I was having the toxic or unhelpful thought, like I really stink at basketball, and I ask myself, well, is that true? Actually, it is, right? Like I'm really not good at basketball. But that's where I ask the second question, is it helpful, right? So I'm maybe not good at basketball, but if I'm telling myself I'm not good at basketball and I'm going to be so embarrassed and no one's going to like me because of it and, all of these things, well, that's not so helpful, right? So, and probably also not so true, a little catastrophic there. And then I want to look at, is there another way to think about it? So we've identified the thought, we've started to challenge the thought. Now we can replace it. So if I have friends that invite me to go play basketball this weekend, instead of having the thought, oh boy, I really stink at basketball, I'm going to be embarrassed, my friends aren't going to like me anymore, maybe I could have the thought, hey, you know what? I'm not very good at basketball. Maybe we could play a game out of it. Let's see how many times it takes me before I make a basket, and let's have some fun, right? Like, let's have a sense of humor about it. Or I can problem solve. You know, if I'm playing this weekend, okay, I got a few days. Let me watch some YouTube videos on how to do a layup shot. So let me, maybe go to the gym and practice a little bit. No, I'm not going to be Michael Jordan by the weekend, but it's something that maybe I learn a couple of things. And maybe I tell my friends, hey, I'm learning. So, or maybe you can show me some things. And I'm starting to problem solve. I'm having a more positive, realistic, and problem solving approach to the exact same situation, right? So, and that's why so often we see people who've been in similar or the exact same situation, and people experience it so differently, to the point where when we look at like what was reality, a lot of people are like, there is no reality, because everyone experiences it differently. So how do you say what's reality, right? So because it's amazing how our human minds and emotions see things. So perception is very, very interesting.
We have a comment that I'm going to get to, but I want to make sure that we summarize this. What you're saying to us is that we should help our teens look at their thoughts and edit their scripts, because we all have our personal scripts. They should ask, is what I'm thinking true? Is it helpful? Is there another way that I can approach this? That we have to teach them how to do that. They're not going to automatically know how to do it.
Right.
So identify, challenge, and replace, because it's all under problem solving. We want to teach them to take a problem solving approach to negative big emotions. Now, here's a quick question, and then we're going to get to Lisa's comment. Let's say that you've been working on your child with this, and they say, and I have one who did this recently, and I thought it was healthy, but maybe it wasn't. How long do you let them be sad? He was kind of upset about something, and I was, I always, let's put a positive spin. And he said to me, you know what, I want to be upset right now for a little bit. I don't want to be positive right now.
Yeah,
How long do you let them do that?
I think that's great. That actually is a great sign of health, that it's like, hey, you know what? This was a situation. I'm sad. Being sad is a normal response to that situation, right? We're going to be sad sometimes, and let me sit with that. Now, I can experience sadness. I can experience anxiety. I can experience grief. I can experience lots of different things. We don't need to fix it right away. So we can sit with that emotional temperature for a bit. And sometimes just even by sitting with it and doing nothing, it will fade. Now, if we find that that emotion is really sticking and it's not fading, and people are like, you know what? I'm still just as sad, if not more sad, than what I was a little bit ago, and it's really getting heavier than I think I can handle. That's when we want to start using the interventions. So, but it's okay for people to be sad. It's okay for people to, have some of those more uncomfortable emotions. And as we practice them, we get better at handling them too. And so it's being able to acknowledge, like, yeah, you are sad in that situation. That is really hard. And doing some of that reflective listening too. And again, as parents, we're so quick to dive in and save the day, right? So, and I'm guilty of that myself with my daughter. And so it's something that it's just taking a minute to be like, oh yeah, tell me about what happened, and what are you feeling? Like, how do you know that you're anxious? How do you know that you're sad? What are your thoughts telling you? What is your body telling you? Right? So it's good to be able to recognize emotions, and it's part of being human. We're all going to suffer a little bit in this life, but it's a beautiful life. And suffering is just, one part of that we all experience. Nobody goes through completely unscathed with that. So, and it's okay to not be fearful of those emotions, to let ourselves let our children experience them. But if they're getting stuck, that's when we have these many, many tools of intervention.
Okay, I'm going to go to one comment and one question, but if it gets heavier than I can handle, that's when we don't let them get stuck. So that's what we tell them, if it's heavier than you can handle. Lisa says she works as an intensive in-home case manager for children and teens. It is so important to let children and teens know that everyone has a less than shining moment. I always have my clients name at least 3 things they can do well or feel are good traits they possess to remind themselves. That's great, Lisa. You're having them remind themselves of their worth.
Absolutely. I think practicing gratitude, practicing self-compassion, compassion for others. I'll work with kids. I mean, there's so many tools and strategies. So we talked about the cognitive restructuring. I teach relaxation skills. I teach meditation and mindfulness, having people get involved in their community, looking at their interpersonal relationships, their spiritual relationships, all of that stuff to just kind of look. And we all get distracted. We all start going down the wrong path sometimes. And it's just being able to have the courage to go back to where we want to be. Sometimes we start hanging out with people who maybe have influenced us in not the way that we thought they would, right? So it's okay to change gears at any point. We can always change our mind. We can always do something different. And it's just having the courage to be able to admit that, to say, ooh, took a wrong turn, and to not be so stubborn that we continue to stay on that road.
Mm-hmm. Courage, that's a word we can use with our teens. They should have the courage, be brave. We know this is hard, but be brave, you can do it. So we have another comment. How can we help teens who will not open up about their struggles?
That's really tough. You know, when I have kids who come in and they sit in the office and they cross their arms and they look at me, right? Like, how are you going to help me, lady? Right? It's something that, you know, it's just kind of being with them. And maybe I'll just start talking about some skills, or I'll talk to them about, yeah, this is hard. It's really hard for kids to let down that defense, especially if they've experienced some really tough things. They've locked that all up real tight. So, and I have to be aware of that, because sometimes, especially if kids have trauma or things like that, we want to take it in little bits, little doses. So, and then giving them some skills. So if I start, you know, trying to dismantle that wall, I better make sure that they have some support in order to deal with what's on the other side. For me to see that takes a tremendous amount of trust for people. And so, so sometimes we just start by talking about therapy in general, or I'll share some, you know, kind of common coping strategies or some life examples. So I always talk about, when I work with a lot of young people, and dating is such an issue. And I didn't have a tremendous success in my dating life, certainly as a teenager and even in college. And I always share the example that there was this young man on campus that I thought was so handsome. His name was Dustin. And one day, Dustin actually stopped and he talked to me. And I was so anxious, and he asked me what my name was. Yeah, I couldn't remember my name. So I told him like which dorm I lived in, like lots of other random facts that didn't fit the answer to his question of what's your name. And eventually we got there. But even with that huge social blunder, there's no love connection there, but we ended up being friends for a while. So, you know, I love sharing stories like that with young people, because it shows life goes on. Like, you know, we're going to have some, and now it's funny, you know, like at the time it wasn't. I was horrified and embarrassed. But with time, you know, things get easier and they do pass. Now, I very rarely get embarrassed. So that it's something, because things happen in life. And usually they are in having a sense of humor, having self-compassion, building that anchor for ourselves. So whatever life storm is, when we're well anchored, we can usually weather it. We can get through it. And teenage years are all about gathering these experiences, feeling those emotions, right? So in learning tools when they get to be a little too much.
Okay. And the goal I hear from what you're saying is, we're not supposed to be their anchor. We're supposed to teach them how to be their own anchor.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
use the tools that you have given us so that they can do this on their own, because it is so tempting for us to do when they're dealing with these big emotions, especially when they're negative. We want to make it all better. That's what we were doing before. That was the job before, to make it all better, right?
And now we have to bridge that, because they're going to grow up and we're not always going to be there. Even when they're real little, we can't fix all those situations for them, despite our best efforts. And so it's just giving, as our children mature, it's giving them the opportunity to learn how to self-soothe, to learn how to problem solve, to learn how to make decisions. So we can't just toss them out there, but giving them these gradual experiences, letting them experience that, letting them know that it's normal and that it's healthy oftentimes to experience these things too. And it's just, at what point does it cross that line where it gets to be too much, and maybe they need some driving lessons with their nervous system.
Okay. what hint do you have for a parent who really wants to help their child with the big emotions, but can't stop themselves from stepping in and being the anchor? What should that parent do? What should I do so that I can make it to the next step and help? I really want to make this help my team become self-sufficient and know how to deal with big emotions and understand that that is part of life. But I can't stop myself from stepping in. What do you have to say to me?
Well, that's where you have to look at your own emotions, right? So, and our own anxieties as parents, and to be able to address that, what are our thoughts around it? What skills do we need to do as parents to take care of ourselves, so that we too can tolerate our children being uncomfortable? So, and to be able to say, okay, you know, do you need me to listen right now? Do you need a little bit of space? Do you want some advice? If I can't help you, would you like to talk to somebody who maybe can? And so, but to not always have to jump to that. So, and to say, you know, do you have practice with this? Or, wow, this is the first time you've been in this situation before. How does that feel, right? Like, what are you feeling? What are you thinking? So rather than be like, well, this is what you need to do. Right?
I like what you said. We need to be able to tolerate our children being uncomfortable. That's the first step for us. And we're modeling that. If we can tolerate them being uncomfortable, then we're modeling for them that they can tolerate it themselves. And
Exactly.
then the next step is to go through what you told us, to ask the questions. You know, what am I thinking? How can I edit my own personal script and really turn this around? Or I mean, not turn it around, but just shift a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we are at the end of our time together. We've had a lot of fun. Speaking of challenges and anxiety, the internet is mine today. But I want, and thank you. You did a wonderful job through this. I thought I was talking without you and you were talking without me. It was hysterical from Jessica's vantage point. Thank you, Jessica, for helping us. If one takeaway for anyone who's watching that can only remember one thing from this half hour, what should it be?
You know, I think it's just understanding that, you know, the emotions are going to be big sometimes. Life is going to be hard sometimes, but it's just, it's funny how things work out. And I would encourage people to have this good, bad, who knows attitude. And if you Google good, bad, who knows, there's a really interesting story that comes up of just how life fits together when we give it time. You know, I'm so grateful for not getting the things that I thought I wanted. Because it's something that it gave me really rich life experiences, a path I would have never maybe anticipated. I went to college for engineering, by the way. And so it's something that, you know, life can throw us some really interesting experiences. And if we have the courage and the flexibility to go with it, it ends up so rich as a result.
That is a perfect note to end on. Tomorrow, it's coffee with Jen and Sharon, same time, 10:30 a.m. Eastern time, same place, Facebook Live or YouTube Live. It's the Your Team for Parents Facebook page and the Your Team for Parents YouTube channel. They're a lot of fun. They always have great conversations from the mom's perspective. Join us tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. for coffee with Jen and Sharon. Thank you, Renae, not only for joining us, but for being the consummate professional throughout all the tech issues. You gave us valuable information and did not blink. It was wonderful. Thank you.
No problem. Wonderful to chat with you today. Take good care, everyone.